There was one
I'm so
time in
proud of
you and
that.
I's relationship, same. But I realized why. That's
Yeah.
not what we do. I've only ever defended myself. I've never been the first to attack.
Yes.
And I realized that in my past relationships, there was definitely a character assassination at times. You and I don't attack each other's character ever.
When it comes to the core limiting belief of unlovability, the way in which individuals go about this formula, not only did you just point out the approach is very different, but the point system, if you will, that is applied across the board on this formula is very different than the approach and the point system within someone who has a core limiting belief as defective. Conscious couples, business partners, and singles committed to attracting their dream partner. Welcome to the Conscious Couples podcast, where we share our life, love story, and combined relationship expertise to help you create and consistently cultivate the most magnificent, intimate relationship possible.
Never again will you feel hopeless and alone in your intimate relationship challenges.
Having accumulated thousands of hours coaching conscious couples and individuals all over the world, as well as starting and growing a global business together, Alan and I are here to guide you in all things relationships.
Thank you again for tuning into the one place where it's not about you or me, it's about the we. Conscious couples and individuals from all over the world, welcome back to the one and only Conscious Couples podcast. Today, we have episode 132. Does your partner really, in all caps, believe in themselves? Emilia and I were unsure if it's themselves or themself. Don't worry about it. It's no big deal. Before we jump into this episode, we want to give a huge shout out to Next Level Podcast Solutions for producing this show and 47 others, apparently. Whoa.
Whoop.
Strong work, everyone. Personal growth, personal development, mental health, self-improvement, spreading throughout the world. Thank you so much for all that you do. If anyone wants to start, grow, or monetize a podcast, please reach out to me, and I will put you in touch with the right people. Sweetheart, before we jump into this episode, ladies first, what is your intention?
My intention for this episode is for our listeners, the unlovables out there, for you to feel heard, and for the people who struggle with a feeling of defectiveness, for you to get some of the cheat codes that's going to help your relationship grow together and not apart. Specifically, what I mean by that is help couples actually build real self-belief.
Okay, so that right there, that intention needs a ton of explanation already, so I'm going to open and set the stage here. So there is a modality of therapy we talk about often called internal family systems. I have a therapist named Carol who is technically a consultant, and she's teaching me IFS. So for the psychologists, clinicians, people out there that have gone down the rabbit hole of IFS, this is going to be an oversimplification.
Oh, yeah.
Please do not villainize me for that. I'm saying it, full disclaimer, this is an oversimplification. All right, so what I've come to understand is that two main buckets of core wound. One is known as defective, quote unquote, and this core wound essentially is someone who deep down doesn't really believe in themselves much, even though intellectually they think that they do. Their deepest fear, I think, is being seen as a failure, and I've actually worked with a lot of clients on this, being seen as a failure.
Mm-hmm.
They'll do
Seen by
anything
others.
and everything to not be seen as a failure.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially deep down, they struggle with self-doubt. That's their biggest challenge, is they just feel like they can't change. They feel like they aren't good enough. They feel like they aren't smart enough. They're not capable enough. Not capable enough is the defective story to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not making that wrong. That's just something that is born in you as a child. Everyone has a core wound. That just happens to be, I think, the most common one. Okay, the next bucket, anything you want to add about?
I was just going to say, this is really actually targeted on something that at Evolve we really specialize in, which is CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. That's where the core wounds, the core limiting belief actually gets birthed in. And so I just want to distinguish between the element of IFS and CBT that's in this episode,
Okay.
because CBT is engulfed within the IFS realm. And I just want to help us all understand, to your point.
Yeah.
We've talked about this before when it comes to Inside Out 2 did a great job at helping
Yes.
us all see that we all have a core belief. And what Alan's referring to, the core wound, is a core limiting belief about ourselves.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for that. So if you've ever seen Inside Out 2, at the tail end of the film, she's playing hockey, and inside herself, her story to herself, her core belief, limiting belief is, I'm not good enough.
Yeah.
I'm not capable enough. I have to score these 3 goals. I have to score these 3 goals. I have to score these 3 goals. And her emotion of anxiety is freaking out. And I think a lot of people who identify with that wound really had trouble with that scene, and they got really anxious, and it's that whole thing. So go see that movie if you haven't. Seriously, it's unbelievable. And no, we're not getting commish.
No.
Okay, the second bucket here of core limiting belief is unlovable. From my understanding, and again, high level here, the number one fear of an unlovable is actually success. It's shining, because the core desire of a defective is actually to be significant, to be special. You want to be the best on the team. You don't want to be seen as a failure. You want to be celebrated. And for an unlovable, it's almost like you trigger the insecurities of the defectives, and then you've been lashed out at times. And so you almost don't want to be shining. You don't really want to be the center of attention. You actually don't want to be significant.
You're always giving your light away to others, especially defectives, because you want them to feel good about themselves, even sometimes at the expense of you.
Exactly. Okay. And so the core fear of the unlovable, I think, is being villainized or being abandoned. And the core desire, the cure is, I think, self-love, self-worth, and unconditional self-love. And that's a whole nother episode. Right now, we're going to focus on the core wound of defective, or the core limiting belief of defective. Yeah. Now, for what Emilia and I have come to realize, and again, we don't want to put anyone into any buckets, is that the majority of our listeners actually identify with unlovable more than defective. And that's what we're going to speak to here today. So Emilia and I have been coaching couples for about 4 years, coming up on 4 years now. And a lot of times there's an unlovable with a defective, and they're triggering each other.
Yes.
And so the medicine that will cure one patient will actually kill another. So the advice that we have to give, we're going to speak just to the core wound of defective here. I've found through my coaching, I have 27 people on my roster, all different walks of life, all different countries. I've come to understand that the people who do identify with the defective limiting belief actually just need to build self-belief.
Real self-belief.
Real self-belief. Because if you've never had self-belief, you don't really know that you don't have it.
And you don't know that you're not actually building real, true, authentic self-belief.
Yes. And so there's a formula to build self-belief. It's state-proof self-assigned. So my business partner, Kevin, identifies as defective. I'm going to use him as an example. So he was an all-star baseball player way back in the day. All-star. Awesome. He thought he got lucky. He thought he stumbled upon success. He never thought he was a good baseball player. He didn't decide in advance to get good at baseball and then work to get good at baseball and then self-assign getting good at baseball. And when I found that out, I was like,
personally offended.
What? I decided to get straight A's and then I went and did it. I've never
Approach
not
is
stated.
So different.
And so, by the way, if you think anyone out there is cocky, they might actually just be stating things in advance. Kevin said this. He said, you sound arrogant when you state things in advance.
Yeah. Like, I'm going to lose 10 pounds in 10 weeks.
Yeah, he said that would sound arrogant to someone else.
To someone who doesn't know how to build real self-belief.
Exactly. And so he said, and then I was talking about a marathon that I did, and he said, that doesn't sound cocky at all. And I said, why? He said, because you did it. It's like,
yeah,
well,
interesting.
It's the exact same to me. Before I do it and after I do it is the exact same to me. I'm going to do it regardless.
Right.
So again, speaking back to the defectives, the people who identify with that core limiting belief, because I don't like to label you defective. It's not my point. My point is that you can build self-belief, but you have to state, prove, self-assign. State means I'm going to get good at baseball no matter what it takes. And I'm going to start small. I'm going to get a baseball coach, and I'm going to be first baseman, and I'm going to work on my hitting. And then you prove to yourself that you can get a home run. And then when you do get the home run, you self-assign. See, I told you I could do it. And this is all a narrative inside your own self. And if you start to build that, you will build self-belief. And as you do, then you're going to have to build humility in tandem. But that's a whole other episode.
A little over a year and a half ago, I attended my first relationship call with Alan and Emilia. And as a single mother, I was very curious what I was actually going to be able to take away from it. I was very blown away with how deep we could actually go in that first session alone. It really opened the doors and opened my eyes to a lot of my patterning and wounding around relationships. Through attending some of their live events and through work with them, I have really grown in confidence. in learning how to love and show up for myself, which has been huge. And it's really set the bar high when in terms of standards for relationships and what I desire and need out of a relationship. They very much practice what they preach, and it's so nice to see people working consciously on relationships. Again, it's really set the bar high for what I look for and what I desire in a relationship. So I'm super grateful to be able to learn and grow from them and be a part of this community.
Speaking of humility, the element that I dug into just before this episode when Alan and I were brainstorming for this one, what I found in coaching people on both sides of the fence is that when it comes to the core limiting belief of unlovability, the way in which individuals go about this formula, not only did you just point out the approach is very different, but the point system, if you will, that is applied across the board on this formula is very different than the approach and the point system within someone who has a core limiting belief as defective. I want to share an example. That example that you just shared, babe, I'm going to go off of that one actually. The state that this person says to themselves, I'm going to go be a great baseball player, right? That is a 1-point system. So that person, when they state to themselves as an unlovable, they state to themselves, I'm going to be a great baseball player, or I'm going to get a home run. They state that to themselves. That's 1 point. Awesome. They take that and put that into like their heart bucket of like self-belief. I can do this. I've got this. When they go and prove that to themselves, an unlovable they'll grab another point, just 1 point. Here's where the difference between defective and unlovables typically exist. It's in that third element of the formula where when they self-assign whatever they just did, there's a massive difference in the point system. An unlovable will self-assign that to themselves at a point system of a 1. Small pat on the back. You'll find actually with a lot of unlovables that they actually struggle to give themselves the credit that they have earned and that they do deserve as a result of their own efforts, right? That formula being applied again and again and again.
Yeah.
They're
so
very
on a sports
humble.
team, it's almost like, no, it was the team, it wasn't me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they have kind of a net system, a net, if you will, score of self-belief of 3, right? State, self-assign, or state, prove, then self-assign. Whereas a defective, what they'll often do is the point system on that third element ends up being like a 10. So they'll have a 1 for the state, a 1 for the prove, and then a 10 for the self-assign, where it's not just a subtle, humble pat on the back. It's like, yeah, I effing did it. I knew I would, even though they doubted themselves at the first step, the second step, and even at the third.
I think I figured out the reason why that is. If you don't have a ton of self-belief, you have to do that in order to grasp at every little bit of self-belief. So Kevin and I identify with the core limiting belief of unlovable. He identifies with the core limiting belief of defective. So we're just leading by example here.
Yeah.
He always says, I need some wins.
Yeah.
And he said, I can't just take losses over and over and over again. I can't fail forward like you.
Yeah.
I've seen you take L after L after L after L. And it's interesting because now I understand when you have that reserve tank of self-belief, you don't need to grasp at every W.
You don't have self-doubt.
Yeah. And I do sometimes. It's just very rare. And there was one time before my marathon, I did a marathon on a whim, and I'll go brief about this. But essentially right before it, my groin was hurting me. I have a groin injury that's been nagging me. It actually hasn't been lately, which is awesome. But back then, it was the night before. I was freaking out. And I actually sat down and I was like, am I going to be able to do this marathon?
You had a humble moment that's not necessarily full self-doubt. That's the differentiator.
Okay, but I do want to share this. I had a humble moment of, I'm going to do a marathon tomorrow. I'm doing this on 3 days' notice. I'm going to do it dehydrated so that I can weigh in. And there's a whole backstory I can't get into. But I had a moment where I was actually questioning whether or not I'd be able to do it. That is the best I can identify with what it feels like to be a defective, because rarely do I ever actually have a ton of self-doubt. And that's actually scary to share. Yeah. That's very scary to share.
Especially as an unlovable.
As an unlovable, that's scary to share because people, how arrogant are you? And so anyways.
It's that 1% of self-doubt that you have. This is how my My business partner, my friend, has shared it with me that 1% of self-doubt that you feel, Emilia, as an unlovable is the 99% of self-doubt that defectives feel all the time.
But they don't.
This is why
they pretend they don't.
Exactly. This is why the net of that formula ends up being a 12 for a defective, and they lose all humility with that, and a 3 for an unlovable.
Just to unpack that mathematically, it's a 1 + 1 + 1 for an unlovable versus a 1 + 1 + 10,
right?
Which is a 12 for a defective,
right?
Right. And so that also creates an emotional swing, though, because if you get a +12 and then you go up the ante and then fail, you're going to go all the way back to 0, and it's going to crumble.
And that's what happens all the time when defectives do not have the lifestyle or whatever they thought their ego deluded themselves in what was going to be the outcome of their life or their career or their business or their relationship. When that happens, they go through an identity crisis. There's an ego death. That's all different story.
And then that ego death creates a fight, flight, freeze, or fawn trauma response. Sometimes what they do is they attack the unlovable.
Oftentimes. Unfortunately.
And I had this realization recently in Emilia and I's relationship. My character has never been attacked by you, and I've never attacked your character.
Oh,
there was one time in you and I's relationship, same. But I realized why. That's not what we do. I've only ever defended myself. I've never been the first to attack.
Yes.
And I realized that in my past relationships, there was definitely a character assassination at times. You and I don't attack each other's character ever.
We wouldn't need to.
And now I understand why, because we don't have that defective core wound. So we do have to jump.
So closing this episode, what can you do if you're a defective listening to this episode, and if you're an unlovable who's also listening to this episode? The biggest thing that we want to share in this episode as we close it is humility, humility, humility for the defectives. And courage for the unlovables.
Yes. Social courage for the unlovables. Be okay being the best on the team. You have to learn how to be okay being the best on the team.
Yep.
And being seen as the best on the team. And you have to hold your energetic shield, because you will be attacked by the people who feel insignificant. Okay. And for the defectives, you really need to have the humility to start small to build that self-belief. 1 + 1 + 1, not 1 + 1 + 10.
Exactly.
Okay.
Both of you guys continue vulnerability. That is going to be the thing that connects the both of you. For a defective, that means, hey, I actually don't believe in myself in this arena. Like, I really need your help. Can you be the pilot in this arena? I'll be co-pilot. I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm struggling to have my words match my action. And I realize there's a huge gap that you're struggling to trust me now.
And so the unlovable, what is the vulnerability?
The vulnerability is, hey, I've seen you talk a big talk. There's a lot of lip service here. And I am recognizing that I'm starting to not trust you. And I don't want to do that, because I really love you and I want to continue loving you.
And I'm afraid that if I bring this up, you're not going to love me back.
And if I continue loving you at this clip, I'm actually going to hurt myself over and over and over again, because I don't have boundaries and I'm not establishing self-respect. And that's not fair to me. That's not fair to you. And that's not fair to the we.
Nice. Okay. So we do have to jump, because I have a coaching session in 4 minutes.
Yep.
If you are resonating with this and you are either in the unlovable or the defective bucket, and then there's a select few who kind of have both, we're not going to go complexify this, but Relationship Talks coaching is helping the yin and the yang work together as a team to increase humility, courage, and vulnerability in both parts of the infinity symbol. As crazy as that all sounds, essentially what it is Emilia and I are going to help give the patient the correct medicine based on the prognosis of which core wound or core limiting belief you have. And we have seen massive transformation in couples who have identified this cycle and this happening. So most of our listeners, I do think, identify as unlovable. And so if you have a partner who is struggling to have their words meet their actions in the relationship, and you do feel held back, but you're afraid to admit that, bring them to RTC. Bring them to Relationship Talks coaching. It's not a judgmental space. It's going to be great. So book on our calendars. The first one is free. The link will be in the show notes. And thank you so much for listening.
Awesome.
And
this was a great conversation.
Yes, it
Thank
was. You. Okay. All right. So as always, we appreciate you. Thank you so much. Usually we plug the event. We do not know what it is yet. Our next Relationship Talks event will be next month. We do not know what it is yet. Keep tuned for the next episode to figure out what that will be.
Feel free to send us suggestions.
Yes, if you have any suggestions, please reach out of an event, and most likely we'll end up doing an event on this because this is
It's
powerful.
it's definitely a
Very,
core
very powerful.
pain that our listeners have.
Yes, the yin and the yang, the defective and unlovable, and what to do and all that. I think that would be a great event.
I agree.
Okay.
Well,
awesome.
we just determined that.
We just determined it. Okay. We don't know what we're calling it yet, but most likely it will be an event on this exact topic.
Nice.
So register for that next episode because the link will not be done yet by the time this episode launches, I think. All right. Thank you, as always, for listening. We appreciate you. It's not about you or me. It's about the we. We'll talk to you next time.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Conscious Couples podcast. We love connecting with the Conscious Couples community, so please make sure you follow us on Instagram. I am at Evolve with Emilia, and Alan is a Lazaros.88.
Also, if you or your partner resonated with this episode, leave us a review at the link in the show notes, and please share this with someone you love and care about.
Until next time, remember, it's not about you or me. It's about
the we.